Now we are going to, we are moving now from politics to politics. Now we're going to move into the most important issue. We're going to talk about politics and addressing the gap insofar as it pertains to women in leadership. We are going to bridge the gap between women's civic engagement and political leadership. To help us do this kind of amazing work, we are going to have on stage the CEO and the president of Vital Voices Global Partnership, that is Alyse Nelson, to come and join us in conversation together with her panelists. Welcome them. Let's give them a round of applause. Yes.
Well, hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be back with the Women's Forum, as always, and particularly to talk about such an important topic, bridging the gap between civic engagement and political leadership. So, as many of you may know, next year is a tipping point year for democracy and politics around the world. It will actually set the course of the coming years and the way in which humanity will be living and interacting around the world. And that is, in 2024, people in countries, half the population, imagine this, half the population live in countries that will have elections next year. My country included, but many other critical elections that will be a true turning point. This is against the backdrop of the fact that we are also seeing a rising tide of disinformation and online violence against women, which has led women to opt out of politics at an alarming rate. I am thrilled to be joined today by two women who have absolutely not opted out, they've opted in. And their stories are extraordinary. Joining us via video is Mandana Dayani. She is the founder and creator of I Am a Voter. So she's joining us from her home in Los Angeles. And thank you so much, Mandana, for taking the time to be with us, because I know that you have been nonstop doing the critical work that is so needed in the United States and truly around the world. I know you've just returned from a trip to Israel. I also want to introduce here with us Shirin Musa. Shirin is an extraordinary Pakistani-born Dutch human rights activist, women's rights activist. She started an organization called Femmes for Freedom. So we're going to get into talking with both of them. I want to come first to Mandana. Mandana, you, and I think this is so true with so many women, we come to our leadership through personal experience. We see something, we're affected by it personally, and we have to step forward. And I think that it's this authenticity of the way that women lead, which is so desperately needed. Talk a little bit about your call, because I don't think you had planned a life of political activism. You were in the business world and very successful, I might add. But talk about your personal story, your personal journey, and how it led you in this direction.
Thank you, Alyse, and it's always such a privilege to speak with you. I was born in Iran in the middle of the Iran-Iraq War, and so many of my childhood memories were of bombings and morality police and forced jobs and fleeing, and ultimately we had to flee. It was very, very dangerous for our family, many members of our family, and I think I was around 5 or 6 years old, and we fled to Italy and ended up coming to the United States through an incredible organization called HIAS, and gained asylum to the United States. And I just remember coming to the US and arriving in New York after, knowing that I was never going back home, and holding my mom's hand and seeing all these big bright lights and scary sounds in New York City, and holding my mom's hand and just know it was going to be okay because she was my home. And we did everything we could to make it work. And my dad worked as a shoe salesman, and we all slept in, one bed, and ultimately went on to live the American dream. My brother became a surgeon, I became an attorney. And I think we always felt incredibly indebted to this country for saving our lives and giving us the most basic freedoms that I continue to watch women in Iran advocate to have. And I think women, immigrants in the US are some of the most patriotic people because we just have like so much gratitude for the opportunity to live there. And after my second daughter was born, and I had been working in different careers throughout the US, I was on maternal leave and I saw the first images of the child separation policy unfold on the news. And I was just seeing these little kids under aluminum blankets in cages. And I got on a plane. I went to Tornillo, Texas, which is where the first camp was. And forced my way in through different connections. And I think seeing these children being ripped away from their parents and separated, calling back to that moment where the only thing that mattered to me was the safety of my family. Like I couldn't think of anything worse that we could do to a population of people and the most vulnerable population in the world. And something felt broken. Like I just didn't see how the country that saved my life could do this. And, I came back to LA and I started taking meetings and about how I could change this policy, what I could do, how I could contribute. And every single conversation I had led to, well, if you really want long-term systemic change, we need higher voter turnout. And I did what I always do when I need to figure something out, which is I called the smartest women that I know. And I asked 25 women I'd worked with in my career that are truly the most successful and smart, well-resourced humans to meet with me that Sunday. And we just started to plan and build and create I'm a Voter to really address the voter apathy that we were seeing and the opportunity to bring more people into the political process to have real change.
Thank you.
And by the way, we've been doing it all as volunteers, so it's been really meaningful.
Oh, thank you. Shirin, I want to bring you into the conversation. You have a similar story in the fact that it was a personal experience that led to your activism. You didn't plan on changing laws. I mean, you have literally changed laws for millions of women. Talk a little bit about that journey.
Well, I fell in love with a man. It always starts with a man, I think. So I entered my marriage voluntarily. And then after 3 years, he left me and he said, well, see you in court. And that, well, my father, he was very upset. He said, well, Shirin, you will get your court divorce, your civil divorce, but the biggest issue is your Islamic divorce, and go and try to fix that. Otherwise, you will be stuck in your marriage for the rest of your life, and he will marry a second wife, maybe a third or fourth, because that is allowed in Islam. So, the civil divorce the verdict of the civil divorce, I received it from the judge within 1.5 years. And then he kept on refusing to give me my Islamic divorce. And you will think, well, what's your problem, lady? You live in Europe and you already have your divorce. But the consequences for not getting the Islamic divorce would mean for me that I couldn't remarry or enter in a new relationship. And that would mean that if I would ever go to Pakistan, that he would file a police case against me and say that this woman, she committed adultery or bigamy and you must lock her up. And it was an unacceptable situation for me. I considered it as, a big injustice and violation of my human rights. And I went to law school and I asked so many professors for a legal cure. And one professor said, it is like it is, you are a woman. Another professor said, go to the Sharia court. I said, no way, because I have to pay a lot of money and I'll be blamed. And then another professor said, well, we have a separation of state and church. And then I studied other communities. I found out that this situation also exists in the Jewish community, which is called aguna. So I went to rabbis. I said, I am an aguna woman. Do you have a legal cure for me? And they said, you're not an aguna woman because you're not Jewish. I said, well, the situation is same. So then I studied further. I found out that a Jewish woman in the Netherlands in 1982, and at that time I was 5, she managed to get her situation recognized by the Supreme Court as a wrongful act. And, well, I thought that if she got her situation recognized by the Supreme Court of the Netherlands as a wrongful act, then I can also go to the court and add to the wrongful act article that it's a violation of human rights, that my right to remarry is violated, and my right to have a new family life, and so much more. And well, we went to the secular court and we requested the judge penalties for each day he refused to give me my religious divorce. And the 9th of December 2010, believe me, it was the most beautiful day of my life, because I received a message from my lawyer that the judge, well, gave the verdict that he must pay penalties for the refusal of the Islamic divorce, and that it's a human rights violation. And it was also the most beautiful day for my father, because he also suffered because of me. He said, now you must go and fix this for other women. And he is very, well, he's a very strict father and, you know, very strong man. He said, you won't be my daughter if you don't fix it. You have a law background and do something. So we went to Parliament, the Dutch Parliament. We proposed an amendment and many other legislative measures and policy proposals. And it happened that in a very short time, the Netherlands became the first country to recognize marital captivity as a forced continuation of a marriage, a human rights violation, and, well, the first country to recognize this in the law. That was the beginning.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Yeah. I think what's so extraordinary is that you gave it a name, something that maybe didn't have a name, and there's so much power in that. I remember, 30 years ago, domestic violence had no name. It was the problem that had no name, and there's so much power in giving it a name, because then you can fight for it as a legal issue, and women around the world can recognize that they're not alone. It's not something happening to them. It's happening to women all over the world, and there is an opportunity to change.
Yes, and also, telling and sharing stories, because otherwise people think this is something theoretical. Right. It doesn't exist. And well, that's why, I mean, people who know me, they know that I'm very shy. I mean, if I sit here, you wouldn't think about that I'm shy, but I have a very shy nature, but the importance of storytelling and giving it a name, that makes things, happen like this.
Well, speaking of storytelling, I want to bring Mandana back into the conversation, because I know what you've been so powerful at doing. You've gotten more than 1 billion impressions and awareness. You've been able to engage hundreds of brands to carry your message. And I think really to understand that you've got to meet people where they are. A lot of people don't understand that the personal is indeed political, that voting actually does change their lives, and they have the opportunity. Talk a bit about the impact that you've been able to have since you launched.
Yeah, thank you. And your story is so incredibly inspiring, Shirin. I think we really operated from the perspective that we can use culture to inspire and shift perspective. And I think coming from consumer backgrounds, we really understand the importance of exactly what you said, meeting people where they are, right? Not expecting them to come find you and your message. And for us, it was, okay, great. People are watching sports. We're going to do a partnership with the NBA, and we're going to be at their finals. People are going to H&M and shopping. We're going to be, we're going to turn the stores into voting locations. Who are their trusted messengers? How do we use them? When there is this world of just increasing misinformation and polarization, how do we find messengers that people trust? And that ended up being the influencers that they love, the brands that they follow and they trust, and really leaning into fact-based information that wasn't divisive. We're a nonpartisan organization, and we found that the more we just lean into really educational, really accessible and inclusive language, the more people, I think, listen and come to the table. And I think, because I'm a Voter Again was started by these incredible 25 women, we really focused on women-centric brands and creating content that had women-centered at it, and bringing more women into the process, because again, they are voting more than men in elections. We've continued to find, but they aren't running for offices as much as they should be. And so again, through this process of getting people more to understand better what the opportunity is for them to keep leading and to keep having impact, I think has been really, really, really impactful.
Telling stories is so important, and I think sharing successes of how women have been able to make this kind of monumental change. In Poland, for example, in the last elections, women were able to rewrite the rules by kicking out conservative leaders, by showing up in droves, sorry, not in drones, at their most recent elections. I think that you hit on something that's so important, Mandana, which is this idea of culture, because culture is one of those things that you can't change it from outside. It is really hard to change. And we can use culture, we can use the arts, we can use media, we can use entertainment, sports to do that. But when I think about changing laws, and particularly cultural-based laws, right? I mean, we talked about, that you wouldn't be able to get that in Islamic law, you would not be able to get the divorce. Talk about what you say to people who say, this is anti-Islam, or why are you going out there and, talking about Islam in a negative way? I'm playing devil's advocate here, because I believe what you do is phenomenal.
No, I understand. Before I started, to share my story, a lot of people warned me that you will give the community a bad name, and it's not good for the community because we're already so stigmatized and stereotyped. And extreme rights will use this. And then my experience is that it's important that we own our stories and our advocacy for change, and then nobody can, extreme rights cannot use this against us. And it's a reality that this exists. And I also say, well, the Muslim community is not the only community. It also exists in the Roman Catholic Church that, divorce is not possible. Aguna, or the chained women, marital captivity is also an issue in the Jewish communities. And Femmes for Freedom is also inspired by the Israeli women's rights organizations. So it exists, violence against women, gender equality, and it's our responsible people from the communities who fight. We must first fight gender equality within our own communities, and then as a minority here in Europe, then we can demand equal treatment and, live our own lives and demand for equality and everything outside the community. So I am a Muslim, and nobody can deny that this exists. And because I own my own story, nobody can say this is extreme right or anti-Islam. No, I mean, I love my community, I love Holland, I love Europe, and it's my duty to do something. Because if women cannot own their own lives, if we cannot make our own decisions, the families will be affected, the communities, and the entire nation. And we must do something.
Thank you. It's so important that change be made, as you said, from inside, right? I mean, because, I couldn't come in, obviously, as an American woman and say, this needs to be changed. That wouldn't work from a cultural perspective.
Yeah. Well, we are here in France, and if something, like 2 years ago, the French president also introduced laws also for the Muslim and migrant communities on to combat polygamous marriages and forced marriages. And a lot of people criticized them that it's Islamophobic. And I said, well, no, we're also fighting against polygamy and forced marriages. So, the voices from the communities, the grassroots activism is important to, counter the narrative that it's Islamophobic. And, I really hate the word of Islamophobic because in the Netherlands, if people say, oh, it's racism or Islamophobic, then, you're denying serious issues. And we've just started. I mean, we really need this recognition of marital captivity also in other European countries, in France. And I believe that it will become also law in the European Union, because the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recognized marital captivity early this year as violence against women. And European countries must take action.
Thank you. Thank you. So in the sort of less than 1 minute we have left, I just want to ask both of you very quickly, because I'll steal a little time if I can, because these women are so amazing. As I mentioned, this year is going to be the tipping point year for democracy. Women are holding the line between democracy and autocratic regimes, between peace and conflict. What instruments can we use to get women out and more political? How do we get them to realize their power? Because I think we've just scratched the surface. I mean, when women saw what you said, I don't think any mother could see, children being locked up and separated from their parents, and not feel like I've got to do something. But then what, right? How do they do that? Mandana, talk a little bit about how you've been able to do that, and how do we tap the power of women as a political force?
I mean, look, I've lived under an authoritarian regime and I've lived under a democracy, and I can tell you that a democracy is worth fighting for. It's not singular. It's never been about any single one of us. It's always been about us and the collective. And, I think that coming from the business world, we need more women to have seats at the board and at the more executive senior leadership levels. And it's the exact same thing within society. It will not function if half of its people are not considered or included. And we need more women in politics, because the decisions that are being made about women, about pregnancy and reproductive rights and communities and childcare and all of these things are being made that impact us, that impact our ability to lead our families and our communities and our nations. And we need to have seats at those tables. We need to be able to make those decisions. Women make better decisions when they're at the highest levels of office. And I think we need higher participation in voter turnout. We need more women to run for office. Women represent only 28% of our Congress in the United States, and I think worldwide it's about 26%. And that is something that needs to change as urgently as possible.
Thank you. And Shirin, final word, final message to close us out.
Get up, stand up for your rights.
Excellent. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Mandana, for getting up so early. Thank you, Shirin.